I'd like to thank our sponsors, Blood Moon Box, a monthly subscription box service for period pads and tampons to help support all humans who have a cycle for that time of the month, and no need to run to a store to mix and match period supplies that don't cater to the entire ebbs and flows of your cycle. There are 2 box options based on your cycle, light and medium, and then heavy. And in addition to the period products, you'll also receive PMS herbal teas, a candle, and some other items for your time of the month. You can reserve a box by navigating to bloodmoonbox.com. And bloodmoonbox.com is on a mission to destigmatize the idea of period blood. At Blood Moon Box, they believe that it is the time to honor the enchanting magic within every person who has a cycle. So join us in embracing the magic of your cycle with Blood Moon Box. Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, consciousness, and spirituality. Today's episode is with Sean Webb, and he has been figuring out how to explain how the human mind works and has some interesting side effects. It turns out that the same model Sean uses to explain the human mind to students also has some amazing applications in the world of artificial emotional intelligence. We're going to dive deep into this subject today. Sean is the author of a number of books, including Mind Hacking Happiness, Volumes 1, and The Code of the Human Mind is something we'll also dive into. So welcome to the show, Sean.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So to kick it off, what inspired you to write a book and spend so much time, thinking about mind hacking and happiness?
Sure. Well, I grew up very poor and on food stamps, and at the age of 17 was destitute just about, and entered the military. And about 10 years later, after getting into high tech and getting a job in supercomputing and excelling in that area, I found myself 10 years later buying a house by myself without a co-signer on a double lot in an affluent neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia. So I had attained the American dream, or so I thought. And yet, as I'm waiting on the front porch for the stereo installers to come hook up the amazing sound system that I purchased to have a big party with all my friends that night who were coming over, I'm already looking out onto the side lot thinking, oh man, I could put a gazebo over there and wire it up for sound and yada, yada, yada. And then something in my head hiccuped, which was, look, you have all of these amazing trappings of success. You got this house that you just bought yesterday, and you're already in the driveway. You got this, 69 Firebird convertible and a fancy red motorcycle that goes super fast and a nice speedboat and a Jeep Grand Cherokee and all the stuff inside the house, teak, carved furniture and black Yamaha grand piano and all this cool stuff. And yet you're already looking for what's next. And so that hiccuped in my head of, okay, something's broken. Because if I followed the rules and I attained all this financial wealth and I'm already asking what more do I need, I must not be happy. So at that point, I took a step back and started to look within to say, okay, what is it within me that I'm missing? I'm missing something. Like if I can't find enough stuff to satisfy, the happiness equation, then maybe I have the happiness equation wrong. And so at that point, I started to read about world religions. Maybe there was something I missed because I thought I'd had a pretty good relationship with God, or what I considered to be God at the time. And was president of my school youth group for years and yada, yada, yada. And, I just wanted to figure out what I'd missed. And so I started to read about world religions. I started to read about Zen Suzuki's introduction to Zen, and learned about meditation and what that was all about. And I started practicing it. And about 2 weeks to 2 months in, I can't remember exactly when it was, I went into a super deep meditation that I started with just kind of a feeling of, well, look, God, if there's something more for me to know, I'm ready to know it, because I don't know that I've figured out the key to happiness here on the planet. And I don't know if I want to just keep chasing more, the next bigger, better, and whatever the next Vegas trip will entail, or the season tickets to the Braves, or whatever it is that I think might fill that hole. If there's something more to know, please tell me, because I'm done with this whole model of chasing the world's wealth as a means to provide happiness, because it's not working. And so I went into the meditation with the idea of, I was focusing on this particular Zen Mondo, and I'm not a Zen guy, but I used it as a tool to try to just explore my own spirituality. And it started out, Yeshan, who's the master, the monk asked Yeshan, what does one do while sitting? And Yeshan said, well, while I sit, I don't think. And the monk asked, well, how does one think of not thinking? And Yeshan said, by not thinking. And if you know anything about Zen, the koans are these riddles that have no answer from a mindful perspective, because you can't figure them out intellectually. There's the message there is there's no book that will give you the answer. There's no riddle that'll give you the answer. There's no answer to a question that will give you the answers that you're looking for to inner peace within. You have to find it. It's an experiential thing. But I took that kind of literally going into that meditation, where I was like, okay, if the idea is that there will be this spontaneous awakening to occur within my mind, if I get it to a point of not thinking, then I'm going to use the 800-pound gorilla of my mind against the 800-pound gorilla of my mind and see if I can't get it to stop thinking, period. And about 20 minutes into that meditation, I wasn't letting any thoughts occur at all if I could help it. So no trying to picture the dog of the bark I heard down the street, no trying to figure out what I was going to have for lunch tomorrow or what meetings I needed to have, no thoughts of any kind were allowed to enter my consciousness. And if one did accidentally, I would just let it go through by itself, kind of like a floating cloud, and then let it disappear. And there came a point where my mind fell into a complete quietude. And this was a peace that I had never experienced in my life regarding the noise of my mind and what it would create. So at that point, there was this energy buildup. And I tell this story in much more detail in the Blue Book, the Mind Hacking Happiness Volume 2. And basically, I went through what's considered to be a Kundalini awakening or an enlightenment experience, or, there's a ton of words that just don't suffice into a definition of what this was. And of course, any experience that a person has, you can't put words to an experience that you have that explains what you experience, because it's like, you try to sit in a hot tub,
Right,
and explain it to somebody who's never sat in a hot tub before, including the concepts of water, warm, wet, bubbling, swirling, all what the bubbles feel like as they come from below up past your skin on the way to the surface. Like you could spend an infinitude of words trying to explain the experience, and they still wouldn't have it at the end of the conversation, right? It would be, a loss of time, and compared to just putting them in the hot tub and getting to a point where they just bang, instant understanding, instant epiphany of what it's like to sit in a hot tub. Well, so in long story short, I went off into the middle of the universe, met God, became God, ran the universe for a little while, understood how absolutely everything in the universe works, was gone so long that I forgot I was a human being named Sean, experienced thousands to millions of lives of other people to gain a compassion over every instance of existence that could ever be. And kind of got a big dish of what I'd asked for. And the funny thing was, like, when I got there, it was like, well, what do you want to know? And I was like, everything. And it was at that moment that I learned to be careful what you wish for, because the absolute infinitude of intelligence and wisdom in the universe started blowing through me to the point that I thought I was just going to disintegrate. There was so much information that I had no idea that there could even be so much information.
Sean, so I'd love to actually double click on some of the things you said, just so the folks in the audience can really understand like what this all means. So like you said, as you kind of moved into this space that you trained your mind to have no thoughts.
Yes.
How were you able to do that? And how can people who are listening attempt to do that? Did you start out small by doing like 1 minute a day or 10 minutes a day? Like how did you kind of work up to this like space where you're able to be so empty?
Yeah, I started with 5 minutes a day, basically trying not to fall asleep, and a lot of times I would fail. So, yeah, I started off light, just trying to figure out, what this meditation thing was all about, because I had no idea. I didn't have a meditation teacher. All I was doing was reading books, and was presently in the book of D.T. Suzuki's Introduction to Zen, and so there wasn't really I think I probably went and watched a couple of YouTube videos, maybe, or read something online about how to count your breaths and watch your thoughts and etc. And yeah, it took a little while for me to be able to get to a point where there was any reactivity at all regarding my mind doing what I wanted it to do, right? Because it always doesn't do what you want it to do, and of course, as I explained in the Mind Hacking Habits Red Book and the Blue Book, your mind is there your brain is your organ of survival, and so it's always there trying to say, is this important? Is this something we should be worried about? Is this something that we need to be concerned about? And so it's designed to always throw things up in front of you to check to see if there's something that's important that you need to be doing, et cetera. And so my mind was doing that constantly. It was constantly throwing in thoughts and images and words and feelings and other things that were interrupting my meditation. And I didn't know at the time that was just a natural process, and I needed to be okay with that. And I went at it as man, I'm failing. That sucks. Shut up. Shut up, mind. And so it took me a little while, but that approach worked for me ultimately, because it was more of I want you to silence, and I'm going to intentionally not think about or not follow the things that you throw up in front of me. And then after a while, the mind simply said, okay, fine, you're not going to respond. I'm going to stop sending you things to ask about. I'm going to stop sending you things that I want you to look at. And it started to quiet, because ultimately your mind, your brain, is your organ of survival, but because of plasticity, it responds to your will. It responds to your thoughts. And after a while, as long as you break its pattern of constantly throwing up things in front of you, it will eventually quiet for you, because it figures out, oh, you really do want me to be quiet. And so, okay, we're going to break the pattern that we've had for the last X number of years of constantly throwing things up in front of you, of constantly having a stream of consciousness of thoughts that come to you constantly. And we're going to try quiet for a while, since you've asked for quiet and you keep asking for quiet. And so for me, that's kind of how it worked. And at the point of quietude, I figured out, and I put it in these words, when I was able to quiet the noise of my mind, I was able to hear what existed just beyond that noise, if that makes sense.
Mm. And can you tell us, like, when you were able to listen to let's say like the field or the collective, intelligence or the divine intelligence, whatever you want to call it, how was that different than the way that you were able to perceive the world before?
Oh yeah. So, and I explain the science in both the Blue Book and the New Green Book, the Human Mind Owner's Manual. But there's a collection of microtubules that your neurons are made of. And so there's this science where your microtubules interact with quantum field vibrations. And so it's my kind of theory that because the walls of the neurons are the most important part of the neurons, it's past the action potential and help you create thoughts, etc., that we're all tied into the quantum field. And so consciousness is a non-local phenomenon, right?
Mhm.
So um, what it's like to tap into that is so different from our existence here, like what we even see with our eyes, in comparison to what you can see when you're looking through your inner eye. Um, it's like watching a 1940s television compared to, high def 4K full color, widescreen IMAX movie, and that's not even good enough, right? In comparison to what reality looks like from the perspective of your inner sight. It is inconceivably complex and infinite, and it comes with a permeable, permanent, unconditional love that flushes through the whole thing, and an understanding and intelligence that comes awash within it. It's one of those things that's simply ineffable. It's beyond words to be able to try to explain it, and it's something that you just have to experience to understand, if that makes sense. But it
Yeah.
is like, take everything that you could ever imagine and multiply it times infinity, and you're going to get close.
Mm.
That's how amazingly profound of an experience it is.
So, how do you discern, what to pay attention to? And I'm also curious, how much of your own reality do you intentionally put out into the field? Like just in terms of manifestation or creating your own, script, if you will. How does that work in your world? And perhaps you could also explain the science behind it.
Sure. So there is, like, for the longest time, I didn't want to bother. Consciousness, I guess, is the word that I often use. When you use the word God, it's like there's a lot of baggage that comes with a lot of people's backgrounds connected with certain words. So I try not to use certain words. But ultimately, I mean, what do you call the ultimate intelligence and wisdom of the universe itself that helps create all of the matter around us, right? In present tense, in continuous present tense of collapsing the wave functions and yada yada yada. I mean, it's a tough word not to use God, but I try to use the word consciousness. So I try not to bother consciousness for a while after I was given such an amazing gift, because what I was able to unpack from that gift became, these 3 books, and I've got probably a handful of other books that I need to go ahead and write that is still basically unpacking that one experience. So I didn't want to bother consciousness for a while from my own egoic needs, because I realized that, I was an illusion, so to speak, in the grand scheme of things. And if I looked at myself as an individual creature, well, that wasn't true, because I was part of the one consciousness that creates absolutely everything. So to try to serve the individual needs of the physiology that I was carrying around and the mind connected with it was kind of a waste of time, and it was kind of a selfish plight from my perspective to say, give me something that I need for whatever, for happiness or whatever. And then I came around to accept, okay, so there's an infinite amount of energy out there, an infinite amount of consciousness. And if it's available for me to use and I'm just not using it, well, that's kind of a waste if I'm trying to serve the greater good of, getting the conscious message out there. Because all the stuff that I was handed through the experience itself, there was a closing message. There was a closing caveat. When I was coming back into my body, I was super disappointed that I was coming back to be a human and coming back into my body that I'd left seemingly thousands of years previous for to fit all these experiences in. And it was, the message was, tell them,
Mm.
which was basically, inferred, tell the earth, tell the whole humanity, human race, everything that you've experienced here. And so, I had that job to do. Well, at the point that I decided that, maybe there's an opportunity for me to manifest some things. So at the point that, I was trying to serve the message of, tell them, and serve the task that I'd been given, I decided to go ahead and start asking for assistance in that charter. And so that's when I started to put intention out into the field to say, it'd sure be nice if, I could show up on some podcasts, or it'd sure be nice if I could sell some more books and create some more revenue to be able to put this new app out that we're now creating, et cetera. And those things started happening for me, which was nice. It was a nice feedback because, 20 years into this thing of getting this huge download and being asked to spread this information, it's like, it's not like I get regular updates and progress reports and job reviews. Oh, you're doing great here, but you need to improve this other place, XYZ. And I had no opportunity to ask for a raise during all those years. So it's kind of like, it was nice to see getting some type of positive feedback to say, yeah, we're listening, and the things you need, you're going to get, which was kind of cool.
Oh, so Sean, I want to actually understand. So when you asked for assistance, how did you ask? And, you know, were you listening every day, or did you just start writing and, get assistance the same way like Neil Donald Walsh did? I'm just curious how it worked.
No, it's more direct connection through consciousness, to where I was getting a lot of information that I shouldn't normally be cognizant of, that would help me in the decisions that I would make regarding what I needed to do, or who I needed to talk to, or who I needed to avoid, that type of thing. Because one of the things that came out of the work that I was given was these algorithms of human emotion. And one of the side effects of being able to create those algorithms of human emotion, the US intelligence community took a great interest in wanting to get access to that information so that they could potentially build weapons that could influence human beings, et cetera. And so in my third book, there's a whole spy story about how they sent an operative from Maryland to move to my little town of North Carolina just to hang out and talk about consciousness. Kumbaya. And basically was constantly asking me about my work, constantly asking me about where the technology was stored on my computers, and what security that I was using. And then one night just gave up and tried to dose me with some tainted weed. And it was at that point I was like, all right, I'm out.
Wow.
It was ridiculous. And I told the whole story in the green book with all the receipts and everything. So it was an interesting portion of my life, and something that we're trying to still use today. Is we're going to build an emotionally intelligent chatbot that can create artificial compassion from Chat GPT type of functionality. And so that was interesting. When I'd get those types of people who wanted to come access the information for the wrong reasons, I'd get tips and things like that. So when I reached out into the ether to say, hey, here's what I need, it would be more of a quiet thought, like a quiet prayer, a quiet thought process, or a quiet tapping into, I'd open up my vagus nerve and feel the love of the universe coming through. And then I'd send that intention out during those moments where I knew I was connected, because you have this within your body, you have this vagus nerve, which connects your brain to your heart, to your gut. And it passes most information from your gut and your heart up into your brain. But there's a 20% that also comes back down from your brain. But when that thing is firing, that's highly correlated from a scientific perspective with a high spiritual state. Like when you're feeling that unconditional love of cuddling a puppy or a kitty or whatever, and your heart literally feels like it's opening up, that's your vagus nerve firing. And there are a bunch of positive um, uh, side effects that come with the vagus nerve activation, which is you have a little bit more psychic ability during those moments. You have a little bit more a love connection into spirit in those moments. You can also maybe reach out and call for a CE5 event and get a flyby of a UFO, which is another story we put in the third book. I did that with 2 Navy SEALs. That was freaking amazing. They did a 90-degree angle right turn at Mach 20 and all for us. It was amazing. I would just reach out into the ether with that general connection to say, look, I'm really trying to get this job done. I'm really trying to reduce pain and suffering in the world. I really kind of need XYZ. And then all of a sudden, like XYZ would show up in my life. For instance, I wrecked our minivan, and I had to go to the Monroe Institute for a special event the next week. And it was during the time where my truck, the truck that I wanted to buy was way up. Like the used car prices were out of control, double what they needed to be. And I really didn't want to afford a truck that was $20,000 more than it should be just because of some chip um, shortage or whatever. So I wrecked the minivan, couldn't drive the minivan, didn't have a vehicle to get up to the Monroe Institute. And then all of a sudden, my buddy calls the next morning after I asked. I was like, look, I could use a little help on this one because I don't have a vehicle to get up to Monroe Institute. It's kind of important that I go up there and meet these people and do this thing. And I don't have a car to get up there. And I don't want to spend too much money. And yeah. And the next morning, my buddy calls and he goes, hey, I just got put in my 2 weeks notice and they just fired me right on the spot. So I got 2 weeks of paid vacation and I'm coming down to see you. And I was like, oh, well, we might spend a lot of time at the car lots because I got to go find a vehicle to get me to Virginia. And he's like, oh, well, I'm selling my truck. And so the next morning he shows, like, first of all, he's going to come over to our cabin to hang out with us and for a couple of weeks, which is awesome. But then he's also bringing me the car that I need for the price that I need it.
Wow, that is amazing.
Yeah, it's just kind of cool to, you tap into it. And I mean, I'm not special. It's like anybody can do this stuff. You just got to find that place to tap into universal consciousness, which is, the thing that is underneath all of the quantum physics weirdness that collapses wave functions. I mean, all of the grandfathers of quantum mechanics knew that consciousness was part of the puzzle, and that was basically the smartest of the smart on the quantum mechanics grandfathers who created the quantum mechanics wave function and got the Nobels for the creation of quantum mechanics in general. All believed that consciousness was the fundamental foundation upon which all physics operated. So, I mean, it certainly makes sense. That would fit with all the religious dogma and beliefs that, God is everything or made everything and is the life energy within all movement of organic matter, et cetera. That completely fits. And if you tap into that, that's an intelligence. I mean, you're talking about two cells that come together in the human body and can create a brand new human body, inclusive of one of the most complex organs known to man in the human brain, and they can do it all in 9 months. Come on, the cells aren't that smart. The cells are pulling the intelligence from the field itself. And if you tap into that, you gain access to that.
Yes, so powerful. And, so I'd love to actually talk a little bit more about the book. You discussed like this concept of the code of the human mind, right? Can you explain what this code is and how it can influence kind of our overall well-being? And then I do want to double click later on the concept of artificial emotional intelligence, but we'll get back to that.
Sure. Yeah. So taking control of your mind to be able to help quiet it and understand that's what all these books are about is, I've got the two books, The Mind Hacking Happiness, volumes 1 and 2. And then I got the third book, The Human Mind Owner's Manual, which talks about the science of consciousness and talks about how science is now proven that our mind goes beyond our brain and body. And it is non-physical. It proves that it breaks the space-time barrier. And they did that in 90 studies in 33 different labs in 14 different countries. And so there's science behind all this stuff that I'm talking about. You can read about it in the books. But the ability to quiet your mind to get you to a point where you can listen to what exists just beyond the noise. There's this thing called the equation of emotion. And the equation of emotion is what your mind uses to create every bit of your emotional output from the time of your birth to the time of your death. And it's very simple to understand. And so you've got two variables that create every human emotional reaction that you will have. And the two variables are your expectation and or preference versus your perception. Now, there's some really cool magic that's connected with knowing those two variables and how they work. And that magic starts with the science of Name It, Tame It, which was started understood by Matt Lieberman at UCLA in 2007, where he put two people or two groups of people through an fMRI, and he sent one group through and he said, okay, we're just going to show you these pictures and then we're going to watch your brain. And that was the control group. And the pictures were basically of emotional situations where people would look upon the image to see someone in anguish or someone in fright or someone in happiness, whatever it was. And the mirror neurons within their own brains, within the scanner, would light up, and the researchers could see portions of the brain lighting up for, like, when a fear picture came up, the fear center in the subject's brain would light up in the fMRI. And then what they did to the second group is they said, okay, we want you to just name the emotion in play. And the difference between the first group and the second group was so dramatic when they were just naming fear or naming sadness or naming happiness of the picture that they were seeing in the fMRI. It would immediately downregulate their emotional center in the brain. Now, the reason this happens is because there needs to be a button in your brain that turns off your negative emotional triggers in the event that you're starting to expend energy that you don't need to expend, because our emotions are a life preserving activity, right? So you go by this coil on the ground, you're walking on the sidewalk, you walk by this coil on the ground, and you're out of the corner of your eye, your brain sees it and says, oh my God, it's a snake. And it starts dumping adrenaline and norepinephrine and all these things into your blood system to get you into a fight or flight, starts shutting off your thinking mind so you can just run away from the snake. And that's a life-sustaining activity. But then you look down and you see it's not a snake, it's a hose. It's a regular garden hose. And beyond being a tripping hazard, is no threat to you. So now the dumping of the adrenaline, the norepinephrine, and all the other hormones that are coming into your bloodstream are a waste of your energy that could save your life 100 yards down the road. So what it needs to do is then be able to turn off the fear immediately. And there's a circuit in your right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex and your medial prefrontal cortex that will turn off your negative emotions immediately upon you gaining new information or understanding about them, how they're working or what they're doing and why you don't necessarily need them. So you go and you glance down, you see it's a hose. Well, this magic circuit in your brain sends a signal back to your limbic system that says, hey, turn off the fear. There's nothing to fear. We figured it out. And the limbic system responds immediately. And in the Matt Lieberman study, they saw it happening live on the fMRI with just naming the emotion in play. Well, when you understand the two variables that come together to create an emotion that has frustrated you through your email inbox or through your headline on your news feed or through something that someone said or whatever it is, the box score of the baseball game on the morning sports page, whatever it is that has upset you, when you start to understand your expectation and or preference versus your perspective, your perception, you can then take a look at the emotion in play, and that uses the name it, tame it circuit like it's on steroids and turns off your negativity. So, like if you have an argument with somebody and you do an emotional equation of emotion analysis of the expectation and or preference versus your perception that were going through your mind of the thing that pissed you off, not only does that separate your awareness from the process that was pissing you off, or upsetting you. Sorry for using the French words.
We can swear.
Okay. So if you look at those two variables, those will literally shut off your negativity immediately. And your limbic system learned at birth to listen to that circuit because it's hardwired into your brain that when you understand that you don't need an emotion, it will shut it off. You're talking about a resolution of the emotion. You're not talking about, having to offset that emotion and repress it and then have to deal with it later. When you look down at that coil on that ground and see it's a hose, you're no longer afraid of that snake ever again because you know it's not a snake. Well, the same thing happens when you do the analysis of your equation of emotion in your brain to identify the two variables that were there that create your upset. And at the point that you look at those things, too, it gives you a little bit of distance between you and the situation. So it gives you a little space of take a breath and calm yourself a little bit. But then it also kicks in that name it, tame it circuit to turn off the thing that's causing you your problem, which is really cool. And from there, you can start to analyze, well, where do your expectations and preferences come from? Well, those things come from your sense of self. And your sense of self is, of course, starts with your body, which is why we dodge out of the way of a baseball flying at our head unconditionally. Like we don't even have a conscious input on whether our body allows us to stop from ducking. We just duck. Or when a fly comes flying at your eyelid and you unconsciously blink, that's your limbic system saying there's a threat coming and we're going to take care of this. Well, that's because your body is hardwired into your sense of self. But then when you start to grow from a baby, you start to learn, oh, well, this is my favorite color. And somebody told me my favorite color sucks and I don't like them anymore. Right. So from there, you start to pile on ideas of identity, politics, religion. I'm a boy, girl, whatever the gender is. I am, I have this job. I have these characteristics of body, skin color, and yada, yada, and culture, and what all that means to me now that I've learned it. All those things get piled onto your sense of self. And those things become your expectations and or preferences that must be defended at all costs. So it's a function of homeostasis. So your entire sense of self all gets an EP, each of them, each of the individual things, like all the people that you're connected with are part of your sense of self because they're your mom, they're your dad, they're your kids, they're your friends, they're your coworkers, they're your whatever. They mean something to you. So those things get mapped onto a sense of self. And there's science that proves that, that's in the Red Book that you guys can read about. But at the point that you have these expectations and preferences of all the things that you're connected to on your sense of self, well, then your perceptions of life come through, your reading of the headlines, your having of the conversations, your seeing the sports scores or whatever it is. Those things get compared to your expectation and or preference. And if they match, basically the balance is if they're equal, your expectation and or preference is equal to your perception, like you wanted your team to win the game and they won the game, then you have a positive emotion that's a result. If they're different or imbalanced, like you wanted the team to win the game and they didn't win the game, that's an imbalance and causes a negative emotion. And there are specific definitions of your emotions to where you can completely understand the difference between anger and fear. You can definitely understand the differences between, a mild disappointment versus a sadness up through a despair. There are rules that, you can easily kind of grasp that'll help you figure out how and why your mind is doing what it was. And the cool thing is, once you understand how your mind works, it's like seeing that their FedEx logo. This is marketing 101. There's a logo for FedEx, and in the middle of the logo, in between the capital letter E and the lower letter X, is just negative space of a perfect arrow. If you've never seen it before, it's really cool. You go look at the FedEx logo and you look at between the capital letter E and the lower letter X, you're going to see a perfect arrow. You'll never unsee that arrow again. Like they show it to you in marketing 101 in college, and then you like forever look at that logo and you're like, there's the arrow. I can't believe I didn't see it before. And well, one of those same types of phenomenons occur when you learn how your mind works. When you learn to see your mind working with its expectations and preferences and perceptions, you can never unsee it. And seeing it kicks in your magic button of the name it, tame it circuits. So that literally turns down your negativity in the heat of the moment, and you can't even sabotage it. You can't even like wish yourself for a crappy life and have your crappy life delivered. It helps you.
So Sean, let's break this down into an actual like example. Maybe someone that you've worked with that has a certain expectation or perception and navigated kind of a messy or tricky situation, how they navigated themselves out of it.
So I've got a number of stories. I've got a number of stories in my books that talk about other people using this technique to their advantage. And then there are a ton of reviews in the book reviews themselves of people using this stuff. I think the greatest story that I had which served me and then served my mom immediately after was when I walked into her assisted living facility, and for the first time in my life, I knocked on her door and she opened the door and she looked up at me and said, "Hi, can I help you?" And, so I'm her only son. I'm the son that she wanted for, she had 4 girls and then 12 years and then me. So, I was the baby, I was the boy, I was the only, it's the male that she wanted her whole life. And here I am standing in front of this lady who has now forgotten that she is my mother and forgotten that she has a son. And so in those few seconds, I am trying to process that I basically have just lost my mom because I now no longer, I'm standing in front of the physiology of the person who gave birth to me, but at the same time, her mind does not hold the memories of being my mom. And so this person in front of me can't hug me like a mom, can't give me advice like a mom, can't joke with me like a mom. She is now a nice old lady who I care about, who is not my mom from her perspective, right? She can be my mom from my perspective with an ailment. And so I had a ton of things starting to build up in my mind, which were my expectation or preferences that, my mom be held at status quo or increased in value. And that my relationship with my mom be held at status quo or increased in value, which are all my expectations and preferences about, the future hugs with my mom, future conversations with my mom, the existence that my mom remember me, There's a loss of my own sense of self in there because my mom's on my self map and now she's kind of not my mom. And, I lose all of those things. And so there's a huge, and what we experience in sadness is when we have a loss off of our self map, like somebody that we care about dies. Or, and this can be, like a very minute version of that is when your team loses the big game, right? Your team's on your self map, there's a devaluation that occurs, and that's what causes your disappointment. And then the greater sadnesses occur when somebody that we really care about or something that we really care about gets ripped out of the center of our self map. It almost feels like our heart has been ripped out. So here I am standing in front of my mom, who's not really my mom anymore, in this first of a all-time experience of her not being able to remember me. And I saw all these things piling up in my mind because I'd been practiced with this technique. And I just kind of said, you know what? None of those things are going to serve me. I understand what the mind's trying to do in creating the sadness result, but I'll pass. And so at that point, I simply became the person consciously who was the nice person who was stopping by to check on this older lady. And that helped serve her because what would serve me would be to go, oh, mom, it's me, oh, don't you remember me? And yada, yada, yada. Well, what kind of thoughts and feelings am I going to be introducing to her mind that I'm now standing in front of a lady, reminding her that she's just forgotten someone who'd been remembered for decades into her life. And now she's losing her memory, right? Is that going to serve me any better if I'm causing her that pain or that embarrassment or whatever ill feeling that's going to cause her in that moment? No, it's not going to serve her at all. It's going to be trying to solve my own needs to say, hey, don't you remember me? Please don't make this the moment that we've already had our last conversation as father and son, or mother and son. Those would be serving my needs. And so I was able to immediately process the negative emotions in about 3 seconds to say, okay, so my mom is no longer my mom, but she's still a wonderful human being that I want to take care of and make sure that she's okay. So I'm going to slide right into that role of being that friendly stranger who has stopped by and wanted to check on her and make sure that the food is still good and that she's still getting the things that she needs to have to be happy, etc. And those things didn't come back to me. Those things weren't repressed that I had to go cry in the car or anything like that. Those 3 seconds of my life were the moments that I needed to process that large amount of grief and loss through its completion. And that really served me because I didn't have to spend months, crying and sobbing and wailing and gnashing of teeth, that type of thing. And my mom didn't have to deal with the fallout of me wanting to change her from what her situation was to try to save my ego or to save my feelings, right? And so, it was pretty amazing, pretty moving moment for me to be able to say, wow, okay, well, at least I'm teaching the good stuff. That this got me through a trying situation. And helped serve my mom because she wasn't upset at all that I was trying to say, hey, you're losing your memory. I'm your son. Don't you remember me? That type of thing. To where she could have a normal day and enjoy the rest of her day and her evening meal and yada, yada, yada without having to think about that, holy shit, my mind's going away. So that's the kind of effect that you can have upon yourself at the point that you drive your mind into a plasticity, because don't forget your brain changes neuroplasticity. Your brain changes in form and function based on how you use it. So you go and you play the piano for a while and all of a sudden you get really good at it and you don't have to think about it as much anymore because your muscle memory, which has nothing to do with your muscles, it has everything to do with your brain. Your brain has rebuilt itself in form and function to help you play the piano. Or if you're doing crossword puzzles, you get better at that because you're practiced at it and your brain gets better at it. You're trying to shoot a basketball or hit a baseball or do anything that you want to do that you normally have not done. And this was scientifically measured in London, where the cab drivers who are required to know London by heart, including all of the traffic patterns, the 100,000 points of interest, no GPS is allowed. They studied the people who were studying for that test, which takes 4 years to pass and an average of 7 times to pass it. You have to memorize everything in London to be able to pass that test. Well, they showed that the brain increases in form and function in the memory area for those folks who are studying for that test. Well, if you're using these strategies for emotional management, your brain will change in form and function to help you reduce your level of pain and suffering over time to where you can process these emotions very quickly, your troubling emotions especially, and then set them aside and no longer be bothered by them, which is the path of a master, right? You're walking the earth with your hands behind your back and nothing can throw you because there's nothing left to throw you. You have such a command over your thoughts and emotions that you can definitely just choose which ones you want to let through and let to come to fruition and enjoy, like the happy moments that you have with your family. And like you can know the process that your brain uses to create that happiness, but you can not block it and simply, enjoy it and bathe in it. And then the upset or the anger or the sadness or the fear and those types of things that would hinder your life from being less epic than it could be, you can absolutely shut those down.
I love that. This is, for me, like having this example is so helpful because I think even maybe sharing one more example for our audience would be great because, you also talked as you were doing this, a couple things. You talked about sliding into a role, taking on an identity as this nice guy, right?
Yeah.
And you brought that up quite a bit in the conversation in general, like the concept of identity shifting. And I'm just curious, how important that is in this process. And it sounds like, in this experience with your mother, that you became the person that she needed you to be as well, where I think most people are oftentimes are self-serving or focus on what, something is happening outside is doing to their own inner world, as opposed to really having this care and compassion for others.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to just say, I really appreciate that.
No problem. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, in general, right, you've got, and what I did there is I just slid into a larger sense of self, right? I was the regular Sean standing there, who's the son of the lady in the doorway. But at the same time, I was also just a guy who was there to check on an old lady to make sure that she had everything that she needed. So my sense of self expanded outward a little bit. I included that person who was there to check on the old lady and just kind of focused on that portion of my existence. But at any time that we have a time for a meditative moment, right, where we have that feeling of expanded consciousness, that rewrites our sense of self to be a little bit bigger than it was yesterday, because the sense of self is super important. The sense of self is the answer to the limbic system's question. Like your limbic system in your brain says, okay, so I'm supposed to identify all the threats in the world and keep us away from the threats, which is fine. So your limbic system scans your thoughts and your senses and says, is this a threat? Is this car coming toward us going to be a threat? Is this baseball flying at us a threat? Is this snake a threat? Is this person saying XYZ a threat? And this is what helps us create our emotions. Well, a second question must be asked, which is, well, a threat to what? And that's where your sense of self comes in, because your sense of self is your laundry list of stuff that your life identifies with to say, okay, so layoffs are coming at GM. Well, I work at Ford. I'm a Ford person, so I don't have to worry about that GM thing. Or when it comes, layoffs are coming at Ford and you're working for Ford. Well, then now the Ford thing is on your self map, and now your brain knows to react and create the emotion of concern or worry, regret, whatever it is. Well, at the point that you're meditating and you're expanding your consciousness into realms of understanding your deeper self beyond the machinations of your mind actually helps that process a little bit, because when you go off into an expanded meditation and you experience something that is beyond your regular conscious self, your subconscious awareness has to rewrite your sense of self, because it pays attention to absolutely everything. Because if it's in charge of creating the sense of self in the mind, it has to have that definition extremely accurate, or you could die. Like if it makes a mistake and says, "Oh, I don't have leaves," and the leaf cutter ant comes over to you and you do have leaves, and then all of a sudden he cuts all of your leaves off and you die. Well, your sense of self has to be absolutely accurate, and so your sense of self pays attention when you have these expansive experiences of consciousness, to where for a second it goes, wait a second, I thought I was the mess of my mind, but it seems to me that I am the mess of my mind and I am the observer beyond my mind. And that's why like an equation of emotion review is really helpful in creating a larger sense of self. Because if you think of yourself as like a mud puddle and your attachments are your little paper boats that are floating in the mud puddle, you can take a life-size life problem big rock, throw it in the mud puddle. It's going to splash water out of the mud puddle, make you feel a little smaller than you normally would. It's going to create big waves of rock and maybe even sink one of your boats, causing a relationship to end or a job to end or whatever it is that this life problem rock has caused. Well, at the point that you're practicing your expansion of consciousness and looking into your mind to see that you're more than your mind, like you can look at your mind and its machinations. You can look at your mind creating your negative emotions by looking at your expectation and our preference and your perception. And all of a sudden, just like a fingertip can't touch itself, or a taste bud can't taste itself, or an olfactory nerve can't smell itself, you need some distance between some perception and a perceiver. Even your eyeball needs some distance in a mirror to be able to look at your own eyeball. So at the point that you're able to look at your mind, there's a portion of your mind that says, wait a second, if I can look at my mind, that means I am not my mind. And so I need to redefine what my mind is and what I am, which is beyond just the machinations of my mind, because if I can see my mind, that means I'm not my mind. And so then it has to loop in that observer. It has to loop in that observation point of you looking at your mind. So now you weren't just your mind, you're your mind and that awareness that is aware of your mind. And every time you do that, your sense of self goes out a little bit. So your mud puddle of self grows out into a pond of self, which then grows out into a lake of self, which then grows out into an ocean of self, which, universe of self. And then that same life-size rock, problem rock, comes splashing into your pond or lake or ocean, and all of a sudden you can't even notice the waves. They don't sink your boats at all because you're able to handle those problems much more eloquently than you could have previously, because your sense of self is so much larger and you're beyond most of the awareness and the machinations of your mind that would have caused you problems last week, last year, last decade. Now you're much more astute in being able to master those moments to say, I am bigger than this problem.
Yeah. Wow, it's so powerful. I mean, it's really interesting how much of a mess our mind can create in our day-to-day life. And just the mastery of this can actually just also collect your energy back, right? Like you have probably a lot more energy throughout the day than most people because you're not wasting it on these like thought forms that end up taking us down neural networks and pathways that are not serving us.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly. I mean, and plus, the energy that you put back into, even like, if somebody comes at you who's in a relationship with you, like my wife comes at me with some negative energy on whatever it is, if I'm reactive and I'm allowing my negative energy to immediately, lash back at her or how I've perceived things without being mindful or thoughtful about it, then I'm going to cause some negative damage to that relationship, or, at least more of a issue that we'd have to deal with before we move forward. And if I don't add that negativity in, then all of a sudden the only thing that we have to deal with is her bad reaction to whatever it is that's going on, the reason that she's upset and coming to me with a negative energy, right? So there's a lot of things that will positively affect your life if you're able to just kind of give that extra split second of reaction to say, okay, let's set this aside for a second, let's look at this situation and let's react. And I mean, I don't know how many people that come to me after reading the book saying, I wish I would have read your book before I sent that email to my boss. Where
that's
it's like,
awesome.
yeah, oops.
That's so funny. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Oh yeah. Well, so This is so fascinating, Sean. We're coming to time. I have a couple more questions for you as we wrap up. And, I think for folks listening in, it just sounds like we scratched the surface, honestly. We didn't get a chance to talk about artificial emotional intelligence. So we'll have to have you back on the show to talk about that at
Sure.
some point. And I wanted to also understand, what sort of things have surprised you the most on this journey that you've been on?
The amount of stuff that I didn't know,
Mm.
especially in regard to the depth of consciousness and the wisdom of consciousness and the how close the connection is and how close the intelligence is. There's this vision that's entering my mind right now that's a great analogy. It's the Sistine Chapel has this great picture of God reaching out toward Adam and they're almost touching, right? And Adam's not really even interested. And it's this God who's reaching out and right there, like the fingertips are almost touching. And if Adam simply reached out just an iota, he would have direct connection with God. And that's the kind of the message of that painting, in that the intelligence, the consciousness, the God, the whatever you want to call it, whatever word that you want to start running away from truth with at a million miles an hour as soon as you put a word to it, that thing, that consciousness is right there with you, next to you, within you. And all you have to do is make the smallest of efforts and you will connect with it. And that's, I think, the message of that painting, where Adam, if he just lifted his finger, would be in direct connection with God. And I think that's what surprised me the most, is that how close and how integrated the intelligence of the universe is into our everyday life. You're never alone. You're absolutely never alone. If you feel like you're alone, you're not alone. That just means you're a little too far separated from the consciousness that, if you put a little bit of effort into it, you could certainly tap into and gain the benefits from.
Yeah, amazing. I love that painting and the reference point. It's so sweet. And what do you want to tell our listeners as kind of a main takeaway or call to action after listening to this show? What do you want folks to think about or do?
Take control of your mind, because if you don't take control of your mind will take control of you. And taking control of your mind allows you to then quiet your mind and then hear the thing that exists just beyond the noise. Because, I could try to sit here and we could try to, go 8-9 hours on try to explaining what it's like to experience consciousness and experience God and get tapped into the whole thing and yada, yada, yada. And every word that we say will be a disservice to everyone who is listening. Because the truth is, you're only going to be able to understand it when you do it yourself and you tap into it yourself and you make a connection with it. And so the magic that I try to bring to the table is to say, here's how your mind works. Here's how you can take control of your mind. Here's how you can shut your mind down to a certain extent to be right there at the cusp of the silence that is required for you to hear what exists just beyond. And at the point that you can do that, that's when you have that direct connection that will answer all the questions that you've ever wanted to ask. And so rather than say, listen to what I have to say, don't listen to anything I have to say, except if you want to take control of your mind, go read my books and that'll explain how to do it. And then you can do it and then get the answers for yourself. Because the answers that I have aren't going to mean anything for you in your life. You're going to have to get them directly from source. And if you can do that, that's when your life becomes an amazing, awesome game of exploring this 3D space-time space to have as much fun as we can before we take our last breath, and help as many people as we can before we take our last breath, because all of our personal needs are fulfilled. Like, we don't need anything from anybody to be happy and blissful and aware. And in that space, life is an awesome adventure. And I wish that for everyone. So if I got one piece of advice for everyone, don't listen to a word I say. Just read the books, get control of your mind, find your own awakening, and then you can burn all my books.
I love it. I love it. Amazing. Amazing. Sean, thank you so much for your time. This was so great. And are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about you, and also where to find your books?
So yeah, my webpage has pretty much all the links out. The mindhackinghappiness.com, and the books are on Audible and Amazon. They're Mind Hacking Happiness Volumes 1 and 2. And then the recent one is The Science of Consciousness, talks about the hard science that shows that our brain reaches out into the future to break the barrier of space-time to be able to gain access to information that needs to react to a task in the now. So, and that was a set of studies that was done, 90 studies in 33 different labs in 14 different countries, that proves that our consciousness is non-local and goes beyond our body and brain. So definitely, if you're a geek of science, open that tome up, because all the most vehement skeptics weren't able to even poke a hole in the science that they did to prove that, which is cool. But yeah, the Mind Hacking Happiness stuff at mindhackinghappiness.com is where you can go.
Amazing. Sean, thank you again for your time. This was so lovely.
Yeah, Yasmin, it was awesome talking to you.
Oh, likewise, likewise. And for our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about so many things about hacking your mind with Sean Webb, and you can tune into Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Thanks again. What would you like to see change in your life? And what is the biggest obstacle that you're facing now? I run a 5-week program at the Inner Knowing School for serious individuals who are ready to take the next step in their personal and professional lives. I will personally be coaching a small group of individuals, a number of practical tools and frameworks for creating an intuition practice and for self-mastery. You can find more at theinnerknowingschool.com. I have a master's certification in intuition medicine, and I've condensed 10 plus years of experience and research navigating how to harness your energy and intuition in an easy to access live curated course. Now, as someone who's helped countless creatives, entrepreneurs, and many who are just plain stuck, open doors of possibility they never thought existed, I've seen this strategy transform people's inner states and external reality. And the best part is that you'll skyrocket your output and unlock your creative genius. I'll work with you weekly live to overcome your limiting beliefs and show you how to manage your energy instead of your time. I'll teach you how to create clarity, processes, develop your intuition based on some of the top tools and frameworks that I've developed. And you'll get access to guided meditations and visualizations not available anywhere else. This method is so effective that even if you don't have that much time, or if you think that you might not be ready, this will work for you. You can check out the link in the show notes to join the waiting list, and you can check out what past clients had to say about the program. Wishing you all many blessings ahead.